It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey Not the Face with your host John Nash and your producer me, Steffi Haynes. And today it's all about Dana White. From top to bottom, the show is Dana White. We only have one single topic in here that isn't about Dana White. It's the world according to Dana, John's favorite subject. But before we get into all of our Dana White talk, I'm going to suggest that if you haven't already, you should pick up a paid subscription because our episodes are divided into two pieces. We split them in half and you get half for free and the other half is behind a paywall for our paying subscribers. So if you want to listen to the whole show, you got to pony up a little bit of money. Now, John, are you excited? Are you thrilled to be talking about Dana White? And how the hell are you?
Well, I guess the answer to both is not very excited to be talking about Dana White. I guess I shouldn't say I'm sure your questions will bring out the best of it. That'll be much more interesting than the normal subject of Dana White is for me.
All right. And how are you?
Well, besides the fact I got to spend a whole hour talking about Dana White, pretty good. All things considered. I'm trying to, if I'd known that was going to be the exclusive subject, I might have given up my my teetotaler nature lately and bought a 6-pack to help me through this.
Oh my goodness. Well, hopefully we have enough interesting topics to speak on that you won't need a 6-pack.
Oh, appreciate that.
All right. So, like we always do, we're going to start off by asking one simple question, and that is, are there any new updates or filings to the UFC antitrust cases?
Well, a few minutes ago, there was a filing. Unfortunately, it's nothing that exciting for us because it is a notice of a manual filing. So they filed it manually because the material is supposed to be sealed, so we are not privy to it. And I believe what that material is, if you recall, the expert in the forensics of the cell phones, the expert that they had brought on to do forensic analysis of the many cell phones, at least the ones they have from Zuffa, TKO, Endeavor, all the defendants, they were supposed to file a written report today. So I'm guessing that's what that report is. It's being manually filed. So we're not privy to it. But next week, we should probably get some information about it because there will be a status conference next week.
And that regards Dana White's phones, right?
Well, that's one of them. It's all the phones, if you remember. They had several phones.
I'm just trying to make my tie-in here with the rest of the show.
I mean, the important part, it has the one phone that they found in the back seat of a car that was in a black case, in a black leather back seats. They couldn't find it. Now they found it, and now we'll find out, I guess, if there's anything on that phone.
Have you ever lost a black phone in a black case, in a black leather seat?
You know, I can't mock them too much for this because I lose shit all the time on my couches, on the covers, on the I put down the cell phone and I can't find it at all. Now, I don't have a evidence hold on me, the evidentiary hold where I'm supposed to preserve all evidence in a court case. So there's that going for me, and I do tend to find it rather quickly. There's that as well, but I lose a lot of stuff. I'll just put it that way. At least temporarily.
Do you think that you would lose a phone for years? Like you wouldn't like turn the world upside down to find your very important phone that was on an evidentiary hold?
Yeah, normally I would say yes, that is true. But we're talking about Dana White here today. And the way Dana lives his life seems to be that certain things are just not a concern of him. If you recall in any interview, they're asked him, what do you think of this? What are you concerned about the lawsuit? Are you concerned about competition? Are you concerned about the complaints of fighter? Are you concerned? What's his answer to all of that? I don't care about that stuff. And so maybe that motto for life applies to keeping track of his possessions as well.
You forgot the rest of his answer, though. Why the fuck are you asking? What have you done with your life? What have you contributed?
Well, that's a lot. But if I ask that part, then I might have to answer it, and that's some deep, deep soul searching for me, and I'm not ready for that.
All right. So, moving on to the Dana White content.
Oh boy.
Let's start with last week's interview that he did with the Breakfast Club. Now, Charlemagne, aka See the God on Twitter, grilled him about a lot of stuff. We're talking about, he grilled him about assaulting his wife. He grilled him about fighter pay. He grilled him about glazing Donald Trump. And I mean, he really grilled him on that one. And he put him in the hot seat. I guarantee you, Dana White will never, ever go on the Breakfast Club again. But the first thing that caught my eye was a question that he asked, and he said, how do you justify being worth billions of dollars, but some fighters need second jobs? And Dana said, and I quote, listen, I'm sure some basketball players and baseball players still need second jobs too until they make it. What do you say to that, John?
Well, here's the issue with that comment. I know a lot of people picked up and you know, the whole interview actually was full of nuggets, and there was a lot of discussion on social media and other podcasts about the comments. Well, I'm glad that you went through it again, because I really didn't want to listen to the whole. I could listen to the little clips that you provided, but I want to listen to the whole interview, no matter how good it is. But regarding this specific comment, one is it contradicts, you know, the issue I have with it, I guess, and a lot of people, it contradicts some of his previous statements, because what he's saying here is a lot of other athletes struggle too before they make it. And that's true. You know, you ask who is in the minor leagues of baseball, minor league players, they don't make much money, especially in the single A, double A levels. Their income was below minimum wage, and they were sued for that. They make very little money. It's a sport of hunger at that level as well, until you get into the major leagues. When you get into Major League Baseball, there's a minimum salary of close to $1 million, benefits, all that stuff that goes for you. And so the question that raises, one is, when Dana White will often say that, or at least he did in the past. I have not heard this from him in the last few years, but in the past he would often say, and I'm sure you remember that, we're the NFL of MMA. We're the major leagues of NFL. The rest are the minor leagues. Well, as a fan, when you hear him say we're the major leagues, we're the NFL of MMA compared to the other teams, we're the big leagues, and then you see fighters get 10-10, it does not seem to make sense, because they are entered the major leagues. You would assume that they would get major league pay, and that's not the case. And so his comparison that he's used in the past all the time, that the UFC is the major leagues, it falls short of that when you see the pay of the guys entering the league. And then when he says, you know, fighters, you know, athletes just starting out, I'm sure they struggle as well, or they make, you know, they don't make much as well. Well, he's correct about that, but then he's confirming that the undercard of his events are not really major league. They're minor league. The undercard are not I guess we should say, we should compare it to as the major league stuff. They're not being viewed by the UFC as the best versus the best in the world. This is not the elite level where every fighter on the undercard is one of the best in the world. These are minor league athletes on the prelims, the lower on the card, competing in the UFC. And I wouldn't have a problem with that in some ways. If that's the model, that's true. It's because if you look at who is on the UFC, not every person fighting the UFC really is what you would call elite level MMA. They're not. Many of them are not the best in the world. People will say when you're in the UFC, you're the best in the world. That's not 100% true. A lot of the fighters are in the UFC because their manager picked up the phone because they live nearby and are available, because UFC just doesn't want to look for another fighter. I mean, how many people on cards are on 5, 6, 7 fight losing streaks? That's insane that there's that many fighters fighting in the UFC. They claim these are the best in the world, and they have long losing streaks, all because they just don't feel the need. The matchmaker is like, I don't want to put another name in my phone that I have to contact to get fights. So it's true that, the best in the world are not all in the UFC. The top of the cards might be, but the undercards are definitely full of guys that haven't made it yet or long past their prime or whatever. And so that raises so I guess you could argue, well, it's understandable then that they make minor league pay because those guys are technically the minor leagues. But then you have to bring up the other thought that enters my mind. Well, that's fine and dandy for them, but then why are the top guys still getting paid so little compared to how much the promotion generates compared to other sports? And I'm sure he doesn't want to get in that discussion. So either way you look at it, the issue is, one is, are you the major leagues, and is every athlete in the UFC the best that MMA has to offer? If that's the case, it's kind of painful to see how little they get paid. Or is your roster full of many fighters that are not big time and are just there to fill spots? Well, okay, that's fine. But that, I guess, still doesn't excuse or explain why your top athletes are not commanding even more money. So either way you look at it, it does not look good. The defense that he offers, I don't think works as a good defense for the UFC.
In our last show, I asked if any birdies had told you about pay increases. And you said that a small handful, like the upper tier guys, were able to negotiate better. But have you heard of any of the lower tier guys? Have you heard of like a blanket increase? Say, instead of now 10-10, maybe it's 14-14 or 15-15. Have you heard anything like that? Because otherwise we're left with just the bonus system acting as a pay increaser.
Yeah, you're talking about the floor. I have not. That's the thing. I've not heard anything yet that the floor has moved up. Now I'll ask around again shortly. We're only a few cards into the UFC on Paramount. But that's something I expected. I expected the minimum to go up to at least, like, let's say 14 and 14 and 15 and 15. And maybe it will, maybe it has. We just, we haven't found anybody yet, but I've not heard that yet. And about the pay increases too, the problem is, as I mentioned last time, I've heard some fighters got new contracts that pay them more, but some fighters have not. Many fighters have not got new contracts. And so it's possible that the UFC's decided we are going to start paying fighters X amount more to move up in line with the Paramount deal. But until, probably a year from now, we won't know if that's the case, that fighters overall, when they get these new deals, are getting sizable bumps, or it's just a handful of fighters are getting rewarded now just because their contracts have been up, that the UFC has no interest in renegotiating it across the board. And that only a select few fighters who lucked out on their timing got new contracts. And, because of just the natural progression of the contracts, that it looks like pay is going up. But so far, from what I've heard, it does not look like overall, at least, especially the pay percentage overall, definitely doesn't look like it went up. The contracts, the pay across the board hasn't gone up. They're only select fighters, it seems, have gotten new contracts, and the floor so far seems like it's still at the same place.
And to your point about some of them, but not all of them, the upper tier fighters. I mean, Justin Gaethje being the most famous case, saying, just weeks ago, or maybe a little over a month ago, saying that, he hasn't seen an increase even with signing on to that White House card.
Yeah, well, no, he didn't see an increase when he was fighting Paddy Pimblett. Then he defeated Paddy Pimblett. Now he has a new contract because his contract had ended, I believe. And I'm sure now he's got a pay bump. But that's the question is, were they planning, because Daniel Cormier said, everybody's going to get more money.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, then they would have come to him earlier. But here it looks like there was not a sizable bump being offered before the fight. He wins, though, in the interim champion. I have no doubt that he has, like they always do, they've negotiated some new contract that gives him a bump. But is that just part of the normal structure of the UFC, the normal progression, or have they given even a bigger bump than they normally would because they have this new lucrative deal with Paramount? That I don't know.
All right. Charlemagne also asked him, why is it when the fighters talk about unions and collective bargaining, UFC acts like it's the enemy? And Dana replied back that they didn't act like that. So Charlemagne pressed him further and asked him, well, is it encouraged? And Dana replied, sure. Listen, we always have to deal with somebody. What did you think about that? What did you think about Dana's answer? And what did you think about Charlemagne's question? Because I saw you tweet something out about Charlemagne's question, a better question he could have asked. But I would posit to you that this show doesn't normally do interviews with the heads of sporting organizations. And considering the type of show that it is, I mean, Charlemagne is known for grilling people, but I would say that this is a first for like the lead of an organization like this. And considering that and the basis of their show in general, which interviews lots of pop culture people, and I guess Dana's pop culture, I think they did a pretty good job, but you had a better question for this. So start with that and then tell me what you think about Dana saying, sure, we encourage it because we always have to deal with somebody.
Yeah, I don't blame them because, again, who's in the weeds like, people like us, fans like us that follow the subject this closely? How many people have, just to toot our own horn here, toot, how many people have brought in the guy that negotiated the CBAs with all the pro sports leagues? We did. We interviewed him, James Quinn. How many guys have spoken to, labor attorneys and other officials to go over these type of material? There's not a great number, right? So to be first immersed in the subject, I'm not an expert on it, but we are somewhere interested. We've talked to people, we've done research on it, we've written articles. And so we're probably a little more informed than most about the subject. So you can't blame them for that. And it was a decent question. I think that's what a lot of the fans would want to hear, the more casual fans. The issue with it I had as a question, I'll go to what I think is the better question first. The better question I think at the time would have been not why do you go against the fighters and they try to form a union, because the UFC really technically doesn't. They are generally not concerned about the fighters forming a union. There is, I shouldn't say the person's name. I don't know if he ever made it public, but there is someone I know in the industry who had talking to UFC executives in the past, and he had said, and I believe there's some documents on this that might have come out, that he had said that the UFC has, when asked about labor organizing with the fighters, that was just not a concern. They were not worried about that at all as a concern because of the nature of the sport, because all these other reasons. It's not something they viewed as a threat really to their industry. They just don't see it as a true possibility. So when Dana White says, oh, they're allowed to do it, and even kind of lie or suggest that we even recommend they do it, which I think is that's a falsehood, but it's not a primary concern. What I wish Charlemagne had asked is, instead of their actions towards unions, and I'm going to mention Leslie Smith in a little bit after this to counter even what I just said, I wish he brought up the class action waivers, the arbitration class action waivers they insert in their contracts. If people follow sports labor, right, you'll notice that the major leagues don't strike when they have problems with the leagues anymore. They don't call a strike and basically hold out their labor from the owners. What they do when they're negotiating their collective bargaining agreements, when one bargaining agreement comes to an end and they have to negotiate the next one, what they do is they decertify the union and become an association. So they're no longer unionized, no longer have a collective bargaining agreement. Why do they do that? Because then they have the right to file an antitrust complaint against the pro leagues. The leagues, the way they function, they're cartels. They're in collusion with each other to make these leagues function. They are violating antitrust law. They're violating Section 1 of the Sherman Act. Every one of them is. And so they want, more than the players sometimes, the owners want a collective bargaining agreement with a union, because when you have a collective bargaining agreement with the union, your labor antitrust violations no longer exist. You're given an exemption because that collective bargaining agreement is basically the players saying we are giving you permission to engage in these violations because we ourselves, as a monopoly on labor, the union, are making this agreement with you. And so the strike part is no longer a threat to the owners. It's the decertification and filing of an antitrust lawsuit. And partly that was done because the players back in the 80s realized that strikes were very hard to get any victory because the players couldn't hold out forever. They couldn't hold out as long as the owners, and players would cross the picket line and they just weren't winning. But they moved to the antitrust method, and lo and behold, they got better deals in the collective bargaining agreements. Well, the tool available to fighters is not collective bargaining because they don't have a union, and it's very unlikely they'll form a union. It's the antitrust lawsuits. So I wish he brought up, you are taking away the one labor weapon the athletes have to basically collectively get some sort of compensation, some sort of agreement out of you. You're removing that possibility. Why are you doing that? If you're not engaging in any antitrust violations, if you're not engaging, do not have a monopsony, why are you concerned about this? And aren't you using your monopsony power to enforce these contracts on your athletes? Now, again, that's kind of unrealistic to expect, but I think that would have been a better question, because that's the true problem facing the fighters right now. It's a bigger issue than not letting them organize a union. The bigger problem is that you're forcing them to sign class action waivers that weaken their power, weaken their ability to file antitrust class actions against the promotion. And so I think that would have been a better question. But on the union side, now they can say that they support fighter sporting unions, and I know they have no real concern of a union organizing, but that also doesn't mean they actually like when fighters do stuff like that, right? They don't like when fighters become rabble rousers and cause headaches with the promotion. And so I think that's one reason, they canned released, I should say, they didn't fire him, but they released Leslie Smith from her contract because she was out asking questions that, I'm not certain they were afraid at the time that she was going to organize the fighters into a union. But they were perhaps concerned that she was, raising questions and going to get a lot of upset fighters agreeing with her and causing more problems. They did the same with Cajun Johnson. And then later, I think they saw the bigger problem, later revealed by Leslie Smith, is that her attempts to unionize the fighters could have led to the UFC fighters being declared employees by the National Labor Relations Board. And that was a concern. So they obviously don't like fighters organizing per se, but I don't think they're concerned about them actually making a union, just because it's just impossible for a bunch of reasons for fighters to actually organize a union. It's infeasible. It's unrealistic. But the attempt even to do it can cause headaches for the UFC. So I'm sure they do not want guys going out there and trying to organize fighters. And on top of that, they've taken away their right to do the process that currently they've been using, and that is file class action antitrust lawsuits against the UFC.
Dana White told Nina Drama that he was promoting Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury. Frank Warren came out in a video and he was livid. And he said, in the contract with Tyson, it says that Zuffa will not be able to promote that fight. Who do you believe here? Dana White saying that he is, or Frank Warren saying that he isn't?
They're both moving their lips. I can't believe either. I don't know who's telling the truth, what's going on. I have a feeling that it's going to be a little bit of that. It's semantics being played here. That Frank Warren, because I'm sure Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn, they wanted an agreement that Zuffa Boxing is not the promoter really behind this, because they're like, we are not handing over our fighters to another promotion that's building it up, right? But I think what's going to end up happening is that Riyadh season will be the promotion or the entity putting it together, and the person they're going to hire to kind of do the event will be TKO on their own, TKO to do it, although TKO will not be labeled perhaps in the posters as the promoter, but then lo and behold, you might have Dana White showing up and everybody's going to be upset about this. But I think that's kind of what's happening. It's not truly a Zuffa Boxing event. It's going to be an event that perhaps even Queensberry and Matchroom will have their label on, but the people selling the broadcast rights, the people organizing the event, that'll be TKO and also I guess by relation with Zuffa Boxing. And so they will be the ones technically putting it together, but their name won't be attached. But it's in the end, if that ends up being the case, I do think Warren and Hearn will still be upset about it, because they do not want the shine of this mega event being given over to Zuffa Boxing. Like, they're the ones putting it together.
Well, when Dana was asked about Frank Warren's comments, he got super defensive. He asked the reporter, "Do I ever say shit that isn't true? That doesn't happen." And the guy was very quiet. And then he busted out with, "That was a question." And so the guy started scrambling. Well, I think you wouldn't. And then he pressed him a little bit further and said that both Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn said that it wasn't happening. And Dana replied, "Well, then it must not be true." And I need to know what you make of all that.
Well, I did hear that. Dana White, the way he said it, like almost like he was being coy there, that he really is going to be the promoter. One thing I will know, when he says, "Have I ever lied?" I would ask him, is Tito still going to be fighting Chuck Liddell at the end of The Ultimate Fighter?
Is he going to box Tito? Remember, they even made a commercial about that. Is Jeremy Stevens?
Yeah, on tonight's show.
Oh, my jinx on you, you owe me a Coke.
There's a long list of stuff where he's outright just told us stuff. And there's stuff, too, where he told the media something, then was called on it later, and he says, "I'm a promoter. That's what I do." So, the idea that Dana White tells the truth is like, we have just a long number of events where you swore something's going to happen. It didn't happen. We found out you outright knew it wasn't going to happen. It wasn't like, "Oh, I was not informed. It was not my fault." No, you knew you were lying to the public, and you did it anyway. And he could be doing it here as well. So never take Dana at his word. But the other part of it, I do think the way he answered that, when I saw that clip, because you posted me that clip, it did come across as he was being a little coy there, and that he was being a little sarcastic, like, "Oh, I must not then." And so I do have a feeling that at least he thinks at this time that the deal's in place, that he gets to be the promoter of this event, which I am, and who knows, maybe he will be the promoter, and it's a shot across the bow for by Riyadh Season and Turki Al-Sheikh to his former partners, something like that, which I could see that really pissing them off. But again, as I said, I am sure they said they have it in their agreement that he cannot promote the event. I'm sure they have some understanding that Zuffa Boxing can't promote it or whatever, but if you listen to when they were first talking about their deal they're going to have with the Saudis, was that they would be the people that organize and do the event for Riyadh Season, but I don't think they were going to be labeled those as Zuffa Boxing events, and I got a feeling this will be the case for that technically Zuffa Boxing will not be promoting this event. Riyadh Season's in charge, but if that's the case, based on those earnings calls, that means a lot of the selling of the material, the broadcast rights, organizing the stadium, or basically organizing all the revenue sources, putting the event on, marketing, all that will be handled by TKO Boxing, or TKO, I should say, and TKO is going to use their Zuffa Boxing entity, so they might not put Zuffa Boxing's name on it. But I guess I'm willing to bet that then they'll, if I had to bet, I bet you that's the way it works out, that they're the ones really running everything.
Now, Dana said that despite there not being a deal struck with Conor McGregor about his next fight, that Conor will do just fine with his new contract, assuming he's signed it or has it in front of him or something, despite there being no pay-per-view points. And he also said that UFC has developed a formula that compensates fighters based on what their points would have been. Do you believe they will compensate Conor fairly for what he brings to the table?
Will they compensate him fairly for what he brings to the table? Well, I mean, you never know what's fair, right? It's you earn not what you're worth. You earn what you have the ability to negotiate. And Conor McGregor, as we know through his entire career, has been, I would argue, grossly underpaid, so not fairly paid his entire career. So I think that will continue here. I am sure whatever he makes will be a fraction of what he generates for the UFC. Well, I mean, technically, you probably won't generate as much because everything for the UFC now is a guaranteed payment. There's no variability except for the gate and a few other things that he can drive. But the life of the UFC, they get the benefit that when they go into the next negotiation or when they start selling sponsorship, every once in a while we have a big Conor-like fight you get the benefit from. And so the promotion as a repeat player will benefit from his appearance. But his, what they call the marginal revenue production, it will not fluctuate like it used to in the past to make it easier to analyze what it should be. Well, how will they pay him? That's the question. And what the formula is, I mean, is it going to be some complex thing where they determine how many subscriptions come to the Paramount service? They have the viewership numbers. I'm not certain. I got a feeling it'll be something simple. I got a feeling like they'll go back over his last few events, total them up, and then average it and say, okay, this is how many pay-per-views it would have sold if we'd gone forward, and we'll take your current contract and we'll add that to this, so you will have something in the neighborhood of what you would have had if it would have been a pay-per-view event. I have a feeling it'll be something like that that's the way they'll calculate it. But if I'm Conor McGregor, I mean, I guess if you're happy with that, that's fine. But that kind of misses the growth over the years that fight purses have gone up, at least especially in boxing, that you're kind of missing up on the average, what they're making. So you miss out on that. But if all you do is want to get in into the octagon and earn some money, that might be the best you can hope for. But yeah, I think that they're going to pay him a flat sum. And that's what I assume. It is interesting to note, though, the problem they had with Ronda Rousey was not that they had to pay her a lot. It was that originally she'd get a payment. Remember when they were organizing the Gina Carano fight? Originally, she was going to get, I guess, increase in her flat guaranteed, but then a pay-per-view bonus, a sizable one, that if she hit the numbers she expected the fight would do, she would have done massive amount for her. It sounded like her entire career, she said. So you got to guess around $18 million total for the event she would have earned. And the UFC at the time, when they're doing pay-per-view and it was based on points, a bonus system for how many pay-per-views they sold, they didn't have a problem with that. But when the pay-per-view disappeared and they had to pay her a flat rate, they didn't want to pay such a large guaranteed. It sounds like if that's the case, if there is not some sort of escalator bonus system involved, it's just going to be a flat amount for Conor McGregor, that they don't have that problem with Conor McGregor. Or maybe that's been the hang up for a while, that they did have a problem and they did not want to pay him a massive large sum that's not tied to pay-per-view bonus. But eventually maybe they caved in or whatever. But I have a feeling it's going to be there's got to be some very simple formula attached, because there's nothing as easy to keep track of as pay-per-view buys. Now, the one thing there is that they could attach to his contract, one source of revenue that is still variable, that's still driven heavily by Conor McGregor, is the gate. And so if they wanted to have something that a bonus system so that it was not all guaranteed. It was based on, you eat what you kill performance. They could say, we will, instead of paying you for pay-per-view points, we will pay you a percentage of the gate, and that should make up the same amount as what your old pay-per-view should sold. And I could see them doing something like that, although they typically do not offer percentages of ticket sales. Maybe they are afraid to start that now because maybe other fighters will want something like that. But that's one way they could do it without offering the large guarantee that they seem hesitant to offer.
So let me ask you this. Do you think with this formula that they're going to figure in, well, Conor's lost his, last several fights. He hasn't fought in over 5 years. He's in his late 30s now. He's gotten in all kinds of trouble, and it looks like he might have addiction issues. Not saying that he does 100%, but it gives the appearance that he does. Do you think those things might figure into that formula so that they could bring his big formula down?
Well, considering who the UFC put as the main event on the last pay-per-view, and considering who the audience for the UFC who appeals to them, I don't think that's the case. I don't think they're going to take that into consideration, that all these negative events are going to drive fans away. I think they're going to expect, hey, if anything.
I don't mean like that. I mean, Do you think those factors will affect the formula so that they can make his purse less, so they don't have to pay him a big bonus because hasn't fought in 5 years. He was on a losing streak. He's older now, blah, blah, blah. Do you think that they'll figure that into their formula to, quote, pay him what would be equivalent to what he was making before? Do you think they would use those factors to not give him what he might be worth?
You'd think if they wanted to drive his pay down, yes, but I don't think the UFC is like that. I don't think they'll have enough interest in doing that. For one, is they're getting this massive amount from Paramount of money. He is not going to eat up with the whole entire payment from Paramount. I think they also don't have the energy to come up with a really complex formula. I think, again, it's going to be something as simple as, like, let's take his last 3 events. What was the bonus he got in his last year? How many pay-per-views did the last 3 events sell? Let's average it out. Let's assume that's going to be the next event. I think it'll be something very simple like that. And the benefit to the UFC, no matter what, is, again, is that he is tied to an older contract. And you could say Conor McGregor's contract is massive. And we'll take a guess. I'm pretty sure, just based from multiple sources, that what he's getting paid is probably in the, again, on a typical Conor McGregor event, based on his previous 3, is somewhere in the 15 to 20 or low 20 million ballpark. When he does the minimum of 1 million selling Cerrone is probably 15, 16 million. And when you get over the 2 million that Khabib did, he gets over 20 million. That's the contract he supposedly has. And, and based on, he was supposed to be similar to the previous contract, where he hits a threshold and there's a big, huge lump sum that's added to his base. I think it's something similar to that. Now, that's a large payment for the UFC, especially compared to other fighters. Let's say they expect this fight to pay Conor McGregor $20 million. That's a large payment compared to any fighter in the UFC. No one, as we talked about previously, $10 million. There's been a handful of fighters in the $8 to $10 million category now, which is large for the UFC. But that seems to be the max outside Conor they've been willing to pay. So you'd think, well, maybe we don't want to pay Conor $20 million, but I still think, even with all his problems, Conor is still the biggest star, still talked about the most, probably going to draw tons of casuals compared to normal. They probably look at that 20 million as, it's still probably worth it for, we are getting our worth for what it's going to draw in. And tell you the truth too, compared to what he could have made boxing if he had gotten out of his UFC contract, compared to what, like probably Netflix is paying, it is still a bargain for the UFC. So I don't think they're going to have a problem. I don't think they're really going to try to push that contract payment down, because I'm sure they're more happy that he did not try to get out of his contract because the contract changes. So I think, just trying to assume, trying to put myself in the shoes of the Zuffa executives into Hunter Campbell's not the one making the call on this, but the other executives looking at the bottom line of the UFC, what they're willing to spend. I don't think they're going to have a problem with something in that ballpark. I don't think they're going to need to try to figure out all these negative stories, how much it's hurt the promotion.
Even though he's not asking for the exact same contract, he's definitely asking for more.
Is he definitely asking for more? Of
course. It's Conor McGregor, and he's represented by Paradigm, who are a bunch of very sharp sharks. And they're legal eagles. And Conor, would you just ask for the same thing, knowing how valuable you are to this company that is now worth $7 billion? Would you do that? I think Conor's asking for more, which is why they haven't come to an agreement yet.
No, I'm sure there's something to that. I'm sure he wants a negotiation and then
the other part of this, before you finish, because I want you to answer, the other part of this is you don't figure in all the extreme measures they're doing for value extraction and asking, their big whale, WWE, asking their stars to take 50% cuts, and the way that they have just totally sucked the life out of UFC with all of their sterilization of the product, and the way that there is no barrier for entry anymore, so that they could pay the bare minimum to get people in the UFC off Dana White's Contender Series. Half the small regional promotions have gone away because of Fight Pass almost being defunct now. So, considering value extraction and that Conor is probably asking for more, what do you think in those circumstances?
Well, okay, that's slightly different than what the original question posed, because it was originally about the pay-per-view points, how they're going to calculate that. Now, I am sure, because you're right about that. I am sure that Conor McGregor's team, especially if they feel like they could get out of the contract, which is amazing that they haven't tried. That's the one thing that it really amazes a lot of people in the industry, that they have not tried to get out of their UFC contract really ever, except for the one time they hinted at a threat to get the Mayweather fight.
But I think you're right about the balloon payment.
Yeah, that might be true. I have no clue. But it would explain why he's unwilling to leave the UFC. He wants his final payment, but who knows for sure? Let's pretend it doesn't exist. I'm sure he's trying to get more money out of it for that. But for the UFC, with the negotiation they're doing, even paying him a little bit more, which they probably don't want to do, it's worth it to them, right? It's worth it because that's the little leverage he has. The little leverage is maybe I can get out. Well, I guess that would explain that we would, if we could know what his new contract is coming into the UFC now, we could determine who had the real leverage here, because considering what fights are kind of available to him on Netflix and what Netflix is paying, and I've talked to some people, Netflix is, they're paying a lot, and actually DAZN's, and other places are paying a lot because they have to, for the loss leader fighters that they want to keep, they're paying a ton as well. But Netflix is really paying a lot for these events, these handful of events per year, considering that would be available to Conor McGregor leaving the UFC right now, and he has this contract that potentially could declare it as void because of the change in the payment structure of it that was not negotiated by him and his team, is not part of the negotiation. If we looked at it and we see that contract basically just pays him what he would have got earlier, that tells us that either Conor's team doesn't think there's anything outside the UFC, or that those balloon payments really might be there, that something might be there that he's holding on to finish out his contract to get at the end, and that he'll do whatever it takes and will re-sign with the UFC. That would explain a lot. But if we see and look at it and see he got a sizable increase to his deal compared to what was before, that would tell us that there was a serious threat that he could have avoided the contract and left, and the UFC didn't want to see that happen. But I do not expect if he was going to get the massive amount of money that he could potentially get on the market against a Jake Paul or someone else on Netflix, I would not expect to see that in the contract. The UFC would not pay. They would not match that amount. If that's what it took to keep Conor McGregor back to stay in the UFC at that point, I think they would let him go, because they just have a formula. They just have a model. The company's very existence is based on the fact that we will not pay fighters above a certain percentage of whatever.
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!